Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and today's the day that we finally get to show off a lot of the new cool things for you guys to check out that are going to be available with the Warden and the Paunch DLC. So, I know a lot of people today are probably going to be showing off various battle footage and stuff like that, but I figured I would just instead spend the day kind of showing you guys all the different models and unique things that they've added to the game. Just because this, I know for me personally, is my favorite part, and I can't show campaign stuff yet, so this is probably the next best thing. So let's start kind of going down the line and drawing your attention to various things. Probably the flashiest thing you'll notice here, which I really like, is that all of the High Elf mages and Archmages now are color-coded. So depending on what lore you're taking, your wizard's appearance will actually change. Mostly color-based. So they kind of have it like the Empire wizards, who all have a unique look depending on the lore of magic they're wielding, which I thought was a really cool flavor for them to add. Up here, we've got the big man himself. We've got Emmerich, the Dragon Prince of Kalador, on his faithful dragon Menathnir, who of course is colossal. Just a really big old star dragon, and he has a lot of really cool abilities that he's really bringing to the table to kick some ass and take some names. Now, I do want to note, before we start looking at abilities and stuff like that, that these are not locked in stone yet. There are still changes being made to stat lines and things like that, so don't necessarily take this completely concrete and what effects some of these things may have. We are, of course, close to having things locked in, but we're not quite there yet. But before we actually start looking at stat lines and abilities, let's finish going through the models. This is another thing I'm super excited about. This is technically a free LC update, not a DLC update. But the Fire Mage can actually take a dragon. So you can now have the Dragon Mages of Kalador in your army. It's not like a unique hero. It's literally just a Fire Mage who is able to take the Sun Dragon as a mount. And I love it. It basically gives the High Elves an equivalent to the Amber Wizard from the Empire, who can take a Griffin. You can have a Sun Dragon on your Fire Mage, which means if you want to go with a all dragon-centric build, you can, while still having magic and a badass Lord, and I love it. Down here, we have the Rangers. The Rangers are a low-tier infantry unit that wield twin swords. They do have the dodge system, so while they have very low armor, they do have some decent damage mitigation as long as they're not up against magic damage. And they have a pretty cool look to them. And they also slap their swords together for some neat audio. But pretty cool unit. Over here, we've got probably what's going to be the most popular new addition, I think, in most multiplayer scenarios. These are the Silvern Guard. And the Silvern Guard are a very heavily armored spearman unit who also have magic resistance. They are very tanky, and it takes quite a bit of effort to actually hurt them. But man, they look heavily armored. Very cool unit. So hopefully you get a good look at them. Over here we have the first Regiment of Renown. These guys, the Talons of Torque, or Calda, one of the two. But these guys are basically really high-tier archers with light armor that have fire arrows, and I believe they also have martial mastery. Yes, and fire resistance. So these guys are kind of like the super badasses of the archer leagues. They're kind of like slightly worse Sisters of Avalorn, but they're also way cheaper than Sisters of Avalorn. They have a nice color scheme, though. Kind of that red and green. Very Christmassy. They're kind of like Christmas elves. Here we have probably my favorite new addition, which are the White Lion Chariots. I love them. They are so badass looking, and it's so nice to have a chariot with just some big old axes being wielded. But you know what they really need is a character. And there he is. Alistar, the White Lion, who a lot of people were really hoping would have a chariot mount, does have the chariot mount. So if you get Alistar in campaign, or you use him in custom battles, he does have the ability to ride a chariot, as he should. Hopefully, if we ever get Korhil, he'll get the same treatment. But yeah, so you have him available. Then over here, of course, we have the War Lions, which are just the lions without the chariot attached. Though they function quite differently, obviously. But they're just a nice fear-causing unit that have really, really big cleave on all their attacks. And it's just awesome to have really big, scary lions. Wow, they have very well-modeled faces. This is another Regiment of Renown. This is Rahagra's Pride, I believe. Yep. Rahagra's Pride are the Regiment of Renown War Lions. They have a very, very cool, like, tiger aesthetic on their coats. Very badass looking unit, and I love red and silver. Red and silver is just a really good color combination. Then last, but certainly not least, we've got the new monsters for the High Elves. We've got the Arcane Phoenix. This is the basic generic one. And then this is the much, much prettier and gorgeous Regiment of Renown version, the Omen of Assurant, who, just a very pretty color combination. The Arcane Phoenixes, I will admit, I was not a huge fan of them at first, but I have come around on them just because they're, when it comes to the Arcane Phoenixes, I will admit, I wasn't a huge fan of them at first, but I have very much come around on them just because their in-battle abilities are actually very interesting, and they're pretty fun to use. So I will get some footage of them kind of doing some action here in a little bit, but I wanted to kind of finish showing everybody off, and we can go ahead and take a look at, like, skill-wise, what a lot of them bring to the table. For instance, for Emmerich here, beyond the usual stuff like breathing dragonfire and stuff like that, his abilities that he brings to the table that are really interesting are that he has the Star Lance, his signature big pointy stick here, which I always love to see characters that have lances as their main weapons. I don't think there is enough of those in this game. The more we get, the better. And the Star Lance, when used, provides a very sizable buff to his damage stats. In addition, it gives the flammable debuff to anybody struck by him. So it's a pretty scary weapon, because he, as you can see, while he's on a dragon, he does have flaming melee attacks. So if he's on Manathnir and you get hit by this lance, you're gonna have a bad time. I was fighting Turin. Unfortunately, we're having some issues with some of the saves of multiplayer battles getting corrupted, which is why I'm not gonna have any multiplayer footage for you guys more than likely, because you save it and sometimes they run into little bumps, but that'll be fixed real soon. And but I mean, if you have this thing active, you can literally, you could just curb stomp certain characters if you get off a good hit. The next thing he brings into battle is the Dragon Horn, which I'll show you guys in a second. Emmerich does actually have a unique animation for, which is super cool, but it's a very, very powerful buff that gives all allies on the map 24 melee attack and has them cause fear, which is incredible. And then last is a debuff he has called the Lord of Dragons, which the Lord of Dragons just debuffs the hell out of a problematic enemy within range. Pretty long range at 150 meters, and it just lowers their melee defense and melee attack. Really, really good in a duelist scenario. Understood. The Rangers, as you can see here, are primarily a cheap anti-infantry unit. They bring some anti-infantry to the table and a pretty decent stat line, but what really makes them good is that 20% physical resistance, and they do have the Forest Strider rule, which means that they do have some bonuses when they fight in forest, so that's kind of nice. And they do have that looser skirmish formation, so they're a little less vulnerable to missile fire. We will obey. Over here are the Silvern Guard. So on top of being relatively heavily armored, they bring silver shields to the party. They've got decent and very good anti-large at 20. And they also have some really nice rules like 30% magic resistance and expert charge defense. So no matter who's charging them, they don't care. These guys we looked at earlier, but oh, their arrows also provide the flammable debuff. That's kind of a big deal. Okay, so yeah, they make you flammable and they shoot fire arrows. So combine these guys with a fire-centric build, whether you're going with dragons or phoenixes, you know, build them around other fire things like the Fireborn Dragon Princes, take a Fire Mage with the, you know, Flaming Sword of Ruin, and then you take these guys and you can really hurt some people just with the sheer amount of flammable you can deal out. White Lions, they have a really nice missile resistance due to their lion pelts, and of course they cause fear, and they are not messing around with that massive bonus versus infantry and significant amount of AP. These guys are nasty in close combat. Regular White Lions, or War Lions, excuse me, also have slightly less missile resistance, but they still have it. Cause fear, very, very solid AP and bonus versus infantry, and of course they have the Strider rule, so they ignore all terrain penalties, and you can move through trees, is the new kind of gimmick they've introduced in this game. The Regiment of Renown version has as a unique bonus an active called Mighty Roar, which whenever I use these guys, I'm really bad about remembering, but if you remember to use it, it is a substantial buff debuff due to lowering leadership and movement speed. Up here with the Arcane Phoenix, the real gimmick they bring to the table is on top of having substantial physical resistance at 20, 70 fire resistance, they cause terror. They have the ability where if your winds of magic are above half, they have a ward save. And then they have Fiery Rebirth, which is if they get to less than 10% health, there's a 50-50 chance that they'll resurrect and gain a bunch of health. However, when they do that, instead of being like the Fire Phoenix, which just resurrects and then moves on with its life, these guys explode. So if they're surrounded by enemies and they get close to dying, you know, they might resurrect, they might die, but regardless, they're gonna unleash a big explosion that does a ton of damage. It really hurts. I'll try and get a showcase of that later. And then they have the Ember Storm, which I'll show off in a second. It basically allows them to cast Flame Storm in place, and it really hurts if you get stuck in it. And then the Omen of Assurant is the exact same, but what he brings to the table is Omen of Hope, which is a 55-meter radius immune to psychology buff for all nearby high owls, which can be very, very good if you're going up against like a substantial fear-causing army like the undead, vampire count, stuff like that. Plus, these guys are no slouches when it comes to fighting in combat. They can hustle around. So, anyway, I'm not going to get battle footage just yet. The only thing I want to go ahead and show real quick is Emmerich's Dragon Horn. So let's start the battle, and you'll see when I activate it.
By ball.
See, he actually takes it out, he blows it, he puts it away, everybody gets the buff. It's beautiful. Alright, on to showing off more things, because there's a lot to do. Alright, so the next thing I wanted to show you guys is just going to be a bunch of Lord updates, so we're going to be hitting those kind of one at a time.
Prince Emmerich.
But this is Emmerich on his unique, he has two unique mounts. He has Manathier, his legendary Star Dragon, but then this is his Dragon Prince Steed. So he is the only character that has one of these. It is not a regular steed, it is a Dragon Prince steed, and you can tell because of the massive armor rating. But when Emmerich is not on his dragon, he is still, frankly, a complete badass. He looks absolutely wonderful. And he still brings, he has martial mastery when he's not on the dragon. So, he can actually kick quite a bit of ass when he's riding around on this thing. And for those who don't want to play the high price for his dragon, but still want to have the Dragon Lord running around the field to slap people with his spear, lance, this is going to be the best way to do it. Let's keep moving. Now here's someone I bet you didn't expect to see. It's Teclis! And he's got a pigeon! Oh, as Turin would say. So Teclis can ride an Arcane Phoenix. Isn't that cool? So Teclis can now ride a monstrous mount, which is terrifying and makes him a good deal more dangerous than he used to be. I have gotten to use this in a battle, and to say that he can hit pretty hard and mess people up is kind of an understatement, especially because you can use like items like the Potion of Troy to keep him active and alive. And he does have all the Phoenix's abilities. For instance, if you have above 50% of your Winds of Magic pool, he has a ward save. He has that big physical resistance buff. Also, he has undergone a couple of other changes. For instance, the Sword of Teclis no longer gives you a damage buff. Instead, it just greatly increases your power recharge rate and your power reserve. So Teclis is just even more about pure magic insanity than he already used to be. And yeah, so you can just chug potions of Troy while you're running around. Also, you can see here something cool they did in this update that I'm really glad they did is they have added a lot of specific stats to various things. For instance, all healing abilities, like the Potion of Chiroi and Regrowth, now tell you, like, vaguely what they're going to heal up to. But they now give, like, pretty rough numbers. But they give actual numbers now. So it's no longer a guessing game about how much you're going to heal. Granted, they usually say up to that amount of healing, so I'm guessing... I think that's how much they heal, like, pretty much guaranteed, but obviously unless you, like, hit your healing cap or something. So, but yeah, that's a super cool thing. I thought you guys would enjoy seeing. So, you'll notice the Arcane Phoenix does lose the ability to, it does not have the ability to resurrect from death, and it does not have the ability to do the little dive flamestorm thing, which we'll show later, but that's likely so that it doesn't accidentally incinerate Teclis in the process. But yeah, moving on. Let's check out Ithorian. Alright, so here he is, the Dark Knight of the High Elves himself, Ithorian the Grim, aka Elf Batman. Ithorian! And he is, he's kind of a badass. I am very, very happy to see a pretty awesome combo of spear and sword. It looks really, really good. He looks really, really good. He's a great character. He does bring a lot of really interesting abilities to the field. Probably most notably is that he has something called Grim Discipline instead of Martial Mastery. And Grim Discipline is that he has a buff until the last 25% of his health instead of the last 50%, which is what Martial Mastery, I believe, is. And but I believe it's a very similar buff, being focused, of course, on melee attack and melee defense. He also does have he does have the lore of High Magic, which I actually think is a very, very good lore. I know some people don't, not everybody likes it, but between Soul Quench, Arcane Unforging, Apotheosis, and Hand of Glory, I think it's actually one of the best lores. Like, it is such a damn good lore with just a lot of utility. You know, yeah, the super spell Fiery Convocation is too slow, so it kind of sucks, and Tempest is very, very good, but it's also very you know, it's very specified. When it comes to items that he brings, we of course have the Fang Sword of Ithorian, his famous badass blade, which he has managed to somehow carry on into Age of Sigmar. And this sucker gives him almost 50% extra physical resistance and increases his armor-piercing damage, which is great. And he also has the Helm of Yivris. And the Helm of Yivris is just awesome. It's kind of an expensive item, but you can literally target anybody within 50 meters with it, and it makes it impossible for them to die. So you have a unit of Swordmasters that's getting crumped by Black Orcs, but you want them to fight to the last man. Boom! Helm them and they'll fight to the death. It's just super duper awesome. You know, you have a dragon who's down to his last 100 hit points or whatever, and you really need him to kill that, you know, Grom the Paunch. You just pop that item on him, it makes him unbreakable, so you don't have to worry about them fleeing while they fight to the bitter, bitter end. So the next important thing worth showing is that while the High Elves have now taken the monopoly away from the Empire on having lots and lots of lores of magic with unique wizards for each one, they've also taken their Griffins. So, although High Elf Griffins, thankfully, are very different looking than Imperial Griffins, there are notable physical trait differences between them. This is Ithorian's. So, this is Stormwing, and he is beautiful. He's got a lovely cheetah pattern, and I'm not sure what bird his upper half is based off of, but he is a beautiful beast, and Ithorian looks very regal and amazing up there. But, you know, functionally the same, but just, obviously he doesn't get the Grim Discipline while he's up here, at least in custom battle / multiplayer. But just thought y'all would like to really see the model, and we might get some battle footage with him in a little bit. But if not, you'll definitely be seeing me use him a lot in campaign. But anyway, let's actually look at some different Griffins. He can ride a horse as well. I'm not going to show that just because it's just a regular horse. But yeah, let's move on. Alright, and this here is the generic Griffin. So this is the Griffin that you will take if you are riding with a prince or princess. It's got more of a war lion back, or just like a regular lion back quarters, hind quarters, and then it's kind of like got a bald eagle front body. But once again, Really nice looking monster. I'm glad that aesthetically they're quite different looking than the Imperial Griffins. Maybe we'll have two of them tango here in a bit. But I'm sure you're all excited to see some other high elf specialty units. Let's take a look at the Mistwalkers. Alright, welcome back, folks. And this time we've got the final new lord to show off, which is the Archmage. And not only are the Archmages color-coded, just like the mages, so you can tell this is a celestial one from her blue coloring and star pants here, but they have a very large variety of mounts. You can take them on horseback, you can take them on a chariot, you can take them on a great eagle or a moon dragon, which is awesome, and we'll actually see the moon dragon getting some more usage, I think. And then down here we have the Mistwalkers of Torque. So in custom battle, these are only available to you if you're playing as the Yvres sub-faction. But these are the Faith Bearers, who have really bad... Man, these shields are giving me hardcore 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy flashbacks. But they have these really badass shields, and basically they are a pretty heavily armored front unit fighters, the Faith Bearers. They have a pretty solid stat line, but the big thing they bring to the table is their Frenzy, and then having 15% missile resistance on top of their shield, so that gives them up to 70% missile resistance from the front. And with Frenzy and Martial Prowess, they actually have quite a scary stat line, because their stats aren't just what you're seeing here. Your stats are this, and then addition to Martial Prowess and Frenzy, which can make them kind of scary. And let's just skip to what I know you can all see, the unit card. Yes, they're here. There is a unit of Griffin Knights. I wanted to talk so bad about these guys, but haven't been able to until today. With their, I think, jaguar or leopard print hindquarters, and then just super badass front quarters. These are the Knights of Torque, and they are badasses. In addition to having the Encourage aura, they cause terror, have 25% missile resistance, which is not insignificant on a flying creature. And they're just a unit of 3 Griffins. So if you're playing in custom battles against, or hell, alongside a Bretonnian friend, you can have full aerial forces of Hippogriff Knights versus Griffin Knights. There are less of these guys, but boy howdy, they pack a punch. And they're just a very sexy looking unit. I love them. Moving on. Down here, we've got the Skyhawks. So the Skyhawks are basically a, they're kind of an interesting unit. They are stock, so they're, you know, difficult to see, and they have Vanguard, so you can deploy them anywhere on the map. But their kind of gimmick is that they have very heavily penetrating missiles. They have virtually no armor piercing, but if you shoot them into a unit of lower tier infantry, they will cleave through models like nobody's business. And they're actually not slouches in melee combat. They don't have a lot of defense, but they're incredibly high melee attack, augmented with their bonus versus infantry. These guys will chew up and spit out any non-high tier or like good medium tier infantry. They will just deal with them no problem, assuming they don't skewer them all on the way in. They don't have a ton of ammunition, but they are very, very solid fighters, and with their stock and Vanguard deployment, they're very, very good for appearing behind the enemy to just shoot the hell out of their, you know, hiding ranged units in the back and make short work of them. As you say. These are the Spire Guard. The Spire Guard are probably the most powerful of the Mistwalker units next to the Knights of Torque. And these guys are badasses. And you may ask, what makes them badasses? Well, first of all, they have expert charge defense. Second of all, they're unbreakable. And third of all, they have a honkin' 180 range and 45 ammo. So these guys are basically Lothard Seaguard on cocaine. They have incredible range and could just sit back, and they could shoot all day long. 45 ammo is insane. And then if somebody tries to get close to them, they'll fight to the bitter end. They can hold the line and keep a good portion of your army safe until they're needed elsewhere or until reinforcements arrive, which is just awesome. Gate guard. Over here we have the Gate Guard. Oh wait, these are just the Gate Guard. Ignore them. They're not Mistwalkers. Understood. The last unit worth looking at is probably my personal favorite because of their range. These are the Sentinels of Astaril, and these guys have 215 range. They're artillery pieces. They're not archers, they're artillery. They are mobile artillery. They once again have the Lothern Seaguard aesthetic, so they bring spear and shield into the situation, but they only have charge defense versus large. And unlike most of the other Mistwalkers, they do not have the Encourage aura. So the Skyhawks and the Sentinels of Astaril do not have that leadership Encourage aura for other troops, but they are very, very solid. These guys, they do have a low rate of fire. It's very slow, but they have very high AP on their missile attacks, and they have the shield breaker. So they just they just knock people's shields off and allow you to do more damage. Comboing the Sentinels of Astaril with the Spire Guard of Torre is a god tier combo. Especially if you're defending in a siege, you will never lose a siege with like a handful of Mistwalker units. Look how badass their spears look too. Look at that. That's a really sexy design for a spear, especially for high elves. Almost is like a dark elf design with all those side spikes. But yeah. And of course, all the Mistwalker units are decently armored. I don't think any of them go below 80 armor. The Skyhawks, yeah, kind of the best way to think of them is the Skyhawks are basically super elite Shadow Warriors. The Spire Guard are super elite Lothern Seaguard. The Sentinels are a living unit of artillery shooters. The Faith Bearers are basically High Elf Swordsmen, which High Elves do not traditionally have swordsmen, but now they do. You can go swordboard now. Classic. And then, of course, you have the Knights of Torque of all, which just give you a big flying monstrous cav unit, which is amazing, and I love it, and it's the best thing ever. Alright, so that's enough on the High Elf side of things. We still have some other stuff to show off before we get to some battle footage, so let's check out the Greenskins. Alright, ain't no party like a Greenskin party, and boy howdy. So here is the man, the myth, the legend, the Paunch himself, Grom the Paunch, and Niblet up on his banner. These two are amazing and have some hysterical animations. They're probably one of the best models to just sit down and watch. Like, watching them fight in combat is great. Watching them just idle animation is great. You may have noticed it right at the beginning, but hopefully they'll do it again. There's actually, yeah, here he goes. So Niblet will go down here into a sack, give meat, and he'll just give Grom food, and Grom will do that when he fights. Niblet will just hop down and give him food, and Grom will eat it. But I love that Niblet's a part of the model. I love that he's got this limp little banner. See, look. Beautiful. Then you've got the River Troll Hag, who has been carefully censored by these conspicuous hanging skulls. But she fights with her big old bag full of mysterious nastiness. Oh, thank you for displaying it. Full of all sorts of fish guts and squid tentacles and God knows what. She, of course, is a very large, monstrous creature. She's not a full-size monster, but she's, you know, she's not monstrous infantry. She's a monster at that size. And she's no slug in combat. I mean, she's got an entire tree as a weapon and brings the lore of death magic. Then here, I've got some of the campaign-exclusive WA units that we haven't been able to see so far. These, of course, will be available to you if you're playing in campaign and you play your cards right. But these are the Armored Squig Riders, and these guys are amazing. If you're playing Scarsnake, it is so worth going out of your way to get like 4 of these in your army, because Armored Squig Hoppers are just amazing. Like, they have an amazing stat line just because they're actually just flat out better than regular Squig Hoppers in every way. Plus, they just look badass. Funny enough, this is kind of technically an Age of Sigmar unit, because in Age of Sigmar, they do have Armored Squig Hoppers. But, now they're in Fantasy, because, yeah, Fantasy's better. Over here, we've got the Lava Spider Riders, which, as you can see, are very creepy and glowy, and they give their riders, fire melee attacks and fire range attacks, but they look super badass, especially with all those vibrant feathers all over them. So you can kind of see all their stuff there. They do still retain their poison, despite being lava. Here are some Spiderling Hatchlings. You can just take these guys. You can actually recruit these guys from Mount Arachnos in campaign. So if you get Mount Arachnos with any of the greenskin characters, you can now recruit these guys into any of your armies, which is kind of cool. Here is the Super Squig, which if you watch my campaign footage the first day, I used one of these guys. Super Squigs are basically just bloated corpses that bounce. They're great. And then here, I brought some regular trolls, just so stat-wise and appearance-wise, you could contrast them with the other trolls. Because you'll note that all the other trolls actually do have unique animations and are completely unique models, which is awesome. So these are the regular trolls. They cause fear, they have regen, they have an okay stat line. That's the end of the story. These are river trolls. River trolls have these big old bone clubs that they wield into battle, made from various things that they've killed. And they, of course, have a slightly different stat line. They do less damage than their troll brethren, but they have much higher melee defense. These guys are more designed as a defensive unit to stick around, because in addition to having... oh, that's interesting. Regular trolls can't hide? That's interesting. But river trolls can. So river trolls can hide... they have regen, but their big thing that they bring to the table is this. Overwhelming odor. So whenever river trolls get within range of an enemy, they will cause the enemy to have their melee attack lowered by 6. Which comboed with these guys' very high melee defense, starting off at 40, is pretty considerable. And they are just dripping all over the place. Nasty. They also have the aquatic rule. Oh! They blow out snot. That is just... oh, God, that's so gross. Anyway, so these guys do have the aquatic rule, so if you do manage to get them engaged with an enemy in the river, they will do work. They will do work. They're kind of like skinks and croc scores on that. And then these are the big bads. These are the largest lads. These are the stone trolls. Stone trolls have like their outer skin has basically turned to stone, and because of the fact they consume copious amounts of it. They're also kind of the most dim-witted of the trolls, but they're also the hardest to kill. You'll notice that they actually have a decent armor rating of 70 instead of the measly 40 of their cousins. They also hit the hardest because they have these huge two-handed clubs, so they have a much higher weapon strength of 120. They also bring into the party, they have 30% missile resistance, 25% magic resistance, and that's all on top of their heavy armor due to their scaly skin. So these guys, if you want trolls that can take a beating but give it right back, these are the dudes for you. For Regiments of Renown, this is the Swamp Things. They are the ROR version of the River Trolls. They are just as nasty, just as gross. The big gimmick that they bring to the table is terror and poisoned attacks, which of course is a really nice combo of effects. Another unit you can get in campaign for the greenskins, weirdly enough, is the Feral Hydra. So if you recruit, I believe, in the snowy climates, you can get yourself a Hydra on your team, which is kind of nice. And you can have Feral Wyverns. So we got this guy flying up here, which is just badass looking. And in custom battle, of course, you can take these guys. Feral Wyvern is so cool looking. It's such an underappreciated monster, in my opinion. Then, of course, we've got him. The big Chungus, the Grand Lad, the Rogue Idol. So these guys are just big, honkin' bullies that have completely adjustable and removable body parts because they're just held together by magic. So you'll note when we show their fight animations later, they don't really give a crap if they completely fall apart. The only downside to these guys, because they do have a very considerable stat line, their biggest downside is that they have the slowest attack animations in the entire game. While their attack animations will hit everybody and deal lots and lots and lots of damage to nearby enemies, they are not the best at monster dueling or dealing with like individual characters who specialize against monsters, like Ungrim, for instance, because they can get absolutely bullied by someone who just attacks a lot faster than they do, because they just are very slow at attacking. You'll see though they do have a very high health pool at 12,000, 150 armor. They do come with a bit of missile resistance due to being made out of stone. But the real gimmicks that are unique to them is they've got the Spirit of Gork, or possibly Mork, which gives leadership map-wide, which is really, really awesome. And then they have these unique abilities called Rubble and Ruin. And basically the way this works, you'll notice that they have the exact same stats, basically, as a Giant when it comes to damage at 600. But every time they lose 25% of their health, their armor goes down by 30, but their weapon strength goes up by 30% as well. So the less health these guys have, the more damage they deal up until they die. But they also lose armor every time they lose 25%. This is a permanent alteration. So like at this, his armor would go down to 120, but his weapon strength would go way up. At this, his armor would go down to 90, but his weapon strength would go even higher up. And at this, his armor goes down to 60, and he rampages, but his weapon strength gets to the god tier. Plus, every time he loses 25%, parts of him break off, and it causes a bombardment of rocks to damage everybody around him, which is kind of cool if he's surrounded by, like, mass infantry. This guy, you'll see if you will see if you've been watching my Grimgore campaign. The Lava Ragnarok, big old scary fire spider who actually is the only of these units that brings like a completely new set of abilities to the game. He has Thermal Thorax, which is a constant drain ability that affects enemies at all times. He doesn't even have to be in combat. He's just always burning enemies that are within 30 meters. And then, of course, he has the Arachne Eruption, which I'll show here in a second, and just involves him, like, shooting out fireballs. And then this big old lad is Da Biggin. Da Biggin is the big bad rogue idol, who's basically a rogue idol on cocaine, who can throw rocks like a Cygor. He has a missile attack. He's basically just the Eye of Morslib, in that he's very accurate, but throws really, really badass looking projectiles. Except for you'll notice he only has 10 ammunition, but he has this ability, Rock Bottom, where he can replenish his ammunition every 45 seconds, but every time he does it, he'll damage himself, as the way he throws rocks is he just rips the rocks out of his own body and throws them at people. Then we've got the Pump Wagons. So this is the basic Snotling Pump Wagon. They are a very, very fun, goofy ability. I love that the Snotlings are in the game. These just tiny-ass, diminutive, gross goblins. When they get into battle, they throw these little mushrooms at people that cause little gas explosions, which are hilarious. They're actually very, very dangerous if you let them get too close and kind of just do their own thing, because they do have very surprisingly high armor piercing with their bonus versus infantry. They are expendable, which is great, so if you end up throwing them into battle and they get killed, nobody really cares. And then all pump wagons have this ability, which is called Pump Harder Lads. And Pump Harder Lads basically just makes it so that whenever they're charging, this will become active, and it increases their charge speed, their regular speed, their charge bonus, and increases all of their knockback for a limited time. And then it goes on cooldown, and they have to be out of combat for 60 seconds in order for it to recharge. Man, these guys are gross. Here, we have the Flappas variant. So you can see they have these big old wings that are hand-operated by this little gobbo. And that vastly increases they have much higher speed, much higher charge bonus, and they have Strider, so they can move through trees and ignore terrain penalties. Over here, this is the Regiment of Renown version, which is the Exploding Spores. And these guys are pretty self-explanatory. They have giant exploding spores. So whenever they charge, the instant they make contact with the enemy, they cause a massive explosion that really hurts if you are infantry. And it takes them 60 seconds to recharge it. So with these guys, you basically want to run them into combat, get them to explode, and then run away, and keep them out of combat for a minute, and then run them back in and all that stuff. And then these, which are arguably the most dangerous variant, but they are very expensive, are the Spiky Rollas, which are very self-explanatory. And the Spiky Rollas, they cause fear, which is super duper nice, and then they have armor-sundering melee attacks. So any enemy that they hit in close combat will have their armor reduced by 30 for 10 seconds, and they have notably higher weapon strength than their fellows. I will say, though, honestly, the best version is probably just the basic version, because the basic version is hysterically cheap right now. I don't know if their cost might change once the multiplayer guys have a chance to really fiddle around with them. Right now, they're only priced at 450 gold, though, which is nuts. But anyway, that's it for the Greenskin Showcase, minus a couple little random things still to show. For, like, abilities and items, for Grom the Paunch, he's, you know, on his big old fat wolf chariot, which is awesome against infantry units and has a massive charge bonus. And Grom is also very quick. 84 speed is nothing to sneeze at, and his maneuverability is very good. He's slippery. But stuff that he brings to the table, he's got Language of Du Bois, which is, as long as Grom is in melee, he makes all nearby greenskins immune to psychology and gives them melee defense and leadership. And that's as long as he's in melee. It's just a passive. Then he has Degradon is here, which increases the leadership, melee attack, and base weapon strength of all nearby allies, which is just a nice leadership ability. He's got the Lucky Banner, which gives him 40 melee attack and 40% damage resistance. Just a flat 40% ward save for limited time. That's amazing. And that's basically his item. That's what Niblet contributes to the conversation. And then he's got the Axe of Grom, Elf Biter. So the Axe of Grom doubles his damage, essentially, because it increases both, well, maybe not doubles, but it increases his base damage and his AP damage by 50%, and it gives him armor sundering attacks for about 30 seconds. Really, really solid weapon, especially if you're fighting a really powerful character or you're dealing with a elite opponent. Elite unit opponent. Then the Giant River Troll Hag, which can talk. And it's kind of nasty. The unique thing she brings, she does have some scroll options when you're playing in multiplayer. She has the Lore of Death. And her big things are she has Swamp Breath, which is basically just a puke ability, very, very similar to Throg's. And then she has Mither. Mither is super powerful because it's a 15-second debuff that just nukes enemy speed by 72%, which is just so good for catching people out of... It's basically Rune of Wrath and Ruin, except for you can take it on a monster that causes fear, that has regeneration, and a lot of health, and lowers enemy nearby melee attack by a bunch. And, yeah, she's kind of ridiculous. And she's no slouch in a fight either. Like, this lady can hit pretty hard with all that AP damage. But anyway, let's check out a couple of other little things, then we'll move on. Alright guys, welcome back. So I wanted to showcase some other changes that have been made to some of your favorite characters in the Greenskin roster. One of the most profound changes is actually to the Goblin Big Boss. So the Goblin Big Boss has acquired a new ability that allows him to be a very, very good character assassin, which is called They Need Stabbin'. So They Need Stabbin' is an ability that every Goblin Big Boss you take can have, and it causes an enemy for 30 seconds. It has to be a Lord or Hero, but it lowers their armor by 30 and their melee defense by 24. If you combo this with having them being attacked by a character like Azhag or Grimgore or something like that, they're just dead. Like, there's nothing that's going to save them. As such a substantial buff, and while it won't really make the big boss capable of assassinating people per se, though he's more than capable of dealing with like wizards and stuff, it is a nightmare if you have a lord or some kind of monster on them. Next thing, which I actually have to start the fight for, is the Night Goblin Big Boss. So his big changes are that he's gotten two new abilities. One is called Fermented Fungi, which is probably one of the most powerful new greenskin abilities in the game, because it not only lowers enemy melee defense, but it also grants Rampage. So, you know, Rampage, forcing an enemy to Rampage is insane. Granted, it gives them the Rampage keyword, not just makes them Rampage. So you have to be dealing damage to them, and you have to do enough damage to cause them to Rampage. But it's a really strong ability if you're trying to catch an enemy character, or maybe trying to lock down their, like, Salamanders or Sisters of Avalor or something. You can just toss this ability on them, force them to Rampage for a good while, and kill them. And then he's got this, the Boss Loons, which are a really... it basically just gives him his own unit of Fanatics, which I wanted to show you now. So a big change to Fanatics in general is that you can actually aim Fanatics now. It used to be like this super clunky system. Now it's basically just like Wind Blast. You just aim it, so you just left click and drag, and you can aim in any direction you want, and then you just let go. And you throw a bunch of fanatics. Oh, and here goes Big Daddy. Perfect hit. So you can see the Biggin here. I just kind of wanted to show you his throwing animation because it's just so awesome. Because he doesn't really care if parts of him are missing. He's just gonna tear pieces off. So he just grabs his chest, rips it out, and throw. And that really, really hurts if it hits like a really high tier unit, like Iron Breakers or whatever. And of course, he does have a very long range, 400. But allow me to show you this goof's melee attacks real quick, because they're just something special. And body slam! So he completely falls apart, and then just puts himself back together. Because whatever, he doesn't care. A round of applause. It's such a beautiful set of animations. Like, these guys are crazy. But like, I love that his body just tends to completely break down from the amount of force he uses in a situation. Oh, and he's terrified. Can't say I blame him.
Archers! Acknowledged! For duty! Archers!